and great to have everyone here. My name is John Colborn. I'm the Executive Director of Apprenticeships for America. Welcome to the third in a series of webinars that are designed to explore some of the new rules around apprenticeship that have been just recently released. I want to just, in case you didn't know, they now have been published in the Federal Register as of yesterday, which means our 60-day comment period began as of yesterday. We want to use these webinars to seek input and feedback from the field on how people are thinking about these regulations, and then use that feedback to be able to promulgate for anyone who's interested to be able to respond to the rules and be able to get comments in to help shape that policy. So I'm going to share a PowerPoint here. The structure of our conversation today, each one has been a little bit different. Today we're going to start, we're going to do a more conventional sort of run through of some of the changes that are likely to impact employers. Then we'll have a conversation, which Ben is going to help me facilitate, around what people like about those ideas, what people don't like about them, and things that we might be able to change or shape as we go forward here. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. Hoping everyone can see the screen. If I can get a thumbs up, that would be great. Thank you. There we go. First off, just a little bit of housekeeping. Because we have a large group, just going to ask you to keep your mute on unless you want to speak. If you do want to speak, please raise your hand, and that'll allow us to recognize you. Make active use of the chat if you could. We really appreciate that, and we save those chats as notes for the meeting. We will have a recording and a summary of the meeting available. I will tell you that there's a little bit of a backlog on that whole process, but we're hoping to have that be able to be releasing those at the end of next week. Just a little bit about Apprenticeships for America. First off, I do want to welcome everyone who's a member of Apprenticeships for America, and a special shout out to the Alabama Apprenticeship Advisory Council, who I think is watching as a group today. So great to have you with us. We are a national association focused on advancing apprenticeship in the United States. Our members include a wide array of practitioners in apprenticeship. And if you're interested in joining, if you did not get an email from us, if you did not get an email from us, please take advantage of the opportunity to join by clicking on that link there, and we'll be putting that in the chat in just a second. I think that's all I have to say by way of preliminaries. So I'm going to move us on. As I said, today, we're going to focus on the impact on employers, and we're going to do a sort of very stylized approach to this, which is to say we're not going to think about employers as sponsors. Now, we know most of the time employers are actually sponsors, but we had a conversation yesterday on the impact on sponsors. And so today, we're really just going to focus on the employer role within apprenticeship. We'll take question and answers on some of those changes, and then get your feedback in the structure that I suggested, sort of pros, cons, and things we might change. I'm actually going to skip this just so we can move right along into the conversation. I'll also just note there's a whole variety of resources that are available to help you navigate the 700-page rules conversation that's out there. Again, we'll be putting this into the chat, but just know that you can download the rules directly from the Federal Register or from the Department of Labor website. The Apprenticeships for America organization has put out a summary of the rules, and there's a link to that. We've also done a side-by-side review, which looks at the current rules, the proposed rules, and then the proposed rules for CTE apprenticeship. We've also started work on a burden analysis, which is really intended to sort of help us understand how different rules can have differential burden effects on different participants in the apprenticeship process. And then finally, I do want to encourage everyone to sign up for the Department of Labor's rulemaking webinar that is scheduled for next week at exactly this time, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. There are links to that. And just note, you have to become a member of the Workforce GPS website, sign up for it, log in to sign up, but that's free and easy to do. So let me just say a word or two about the changes for employers. Actually, it'll be about 10 minutes of words. In Oregon, because employers are central to apprenticeship, it was sort of hard to sort of speak to exactly how you describe the impact of these rules on employers. And I want to acknowledge the fundamentals around an employer's role in apprenticeship has not changed. So an employer continues to be the employer of the apprentice, continues to provide the environment for work-based learning, and continues to be a central piece of the apprenticeship equation. What I did want to suggest, though, is that there's sort of a number of themes running through the rule changes that will change or that potentially could change how employers relate to apprenticeship. The first of these themes is really around a desire from the department for stronger quality assurance and improved overall quality of apprenticeship. That's a good goal. How you go about achieving that goal can have more or less effect on individual participants in the process, and might be viewed as layering on burdens or providing challenges to folks in participating in apprenticeship. The second theme is another theme, a very worthwhile thing to be talking about, which is how do we ensure that apprenticeships are fully inclusive, that they represent the diversity of the United States, and that we are doing all we can to make sure that anyone can access an apprenticeship. Again, really great goal. How you go about achieving that goal and the differential impacts on different participants in the apprenticeship process is something that is worthy of taking on as part of the rules comment process. And then finally, the department has a strong interest in advancing the protection of apprentices who are participating in apprenticeship programs. And once again, great goal. And we'll see how that plays out for employers. But again, that's going to be a conversation for the apprenticeship rules comments process. I would say that, as I said, there is a general notion that employers who are in group-sponsored apprenticeship will be able to lean on their sponsor for compliance purposes, and so that may ameliorate or mitigate some of the impact of these rules on employers. But we've tried to call out those rules that the sponsor is either going to have to downstream to the employer or are going to affect the employer regardless of their role as sponsor or not. Let's start with quality assurance. And the first and major piece around quality assurance is a requirement for a new document called a Program Standards Adoption Agreement. And this replaces what many have used as an employer acceptance agreement, I think, for group sponsorship. So in this new agreement, it takes a lot of those and then goes a little bit further. As you would expect, for employers participating in group sponsorship, you want to make sure that the employer is bought into the standards of that apprenticeship, of that registered apprenticeship. The Program Standards Adoption Agreement does go somewhat beyond that, in that it also speaks to a whole variety of processes around that the employer is expected to support the sponsor around, including record keeping, data collection, that sort of thing. And just in case there was some notion that this might be just a pro forma thing, there is this notion that registered apprenticeship programs that are not keeping current with the program standards adoption agreement process can be deregistered. So there is an expectation that sponsors will be actively engaged in securing and then enforcing or upholding these program standards adoptions agreements with employers. Also in quality assurance, or as part of the program standards adoption agreement, quite a bit of conversation, quite a bit of discussion around record keeping. You can see here a wide array of records are expected to be kept by employers and be available for inspection by the sponsor and by the registering agency in order to in order to exert their oversight role on apprenticeship. And then on training, the quality assurance around training is really intended to make sure that apprenticeship trainers, both the classroom trainers and on-the-job trainers, are able to develop and support apprentices through the apprenticeship process so that they can become journey workers. Because the employer provides the journey worker who's going to be the on-the-job trainer for the apprentice, there's a variety of rules that will apply to the selection and preparation of that journey worker in the apprenticeship training process. And you can see a set of requirements for the journey worker. And you can also see that there's some expectation, and this kind of starts to get into our EEO, diversity and inclusion theme. There's some expectation that journey workers would be trained in and be able to navigate a diversity of participants in the apprenticeship program. On to diversity and inclusion. So one thing that you'll see in the rules is that there is a call out that registered apprenticeship programs should have a plan for what it's called the equitable recruitment and retention of apprentices, including apprentices from underserved communities. And because the employer is ultimately the decision maker around recruitment and retention, that is a requirement that will downstream to the employer, regardless of their role as a sponsor or not. The sponsor is also required to submit plans for how they'll implement EEO requirements, which requires some level of collaboration and engagement with employers in order to make sure that happens. And you'll see that there's also a requirement for anti-harassment training for stakeholders involved in a registered apprenticeship program. And then the diversity inclusion theme also will create, require that employers have the measures for a safe workplace. That was a part of the original or the current rules, but now also an inclusive workplace and free from all forms of violence and etc. So again, how that actually plays out in the workplace, what that looks like, how sponsors might work with employers in group apprenticeship to ensure that happens is left to the individual apprenticeship program, but will undoubtedly create some level of some new requirements for employers. And then finally, I want to get, and finally, I want to get to this theme of apprenticeship protection. The apprenticeship agreement gets a much more elaborated treatment in the new rules, with a lot more stipulation of exactly what must be in the apprenticeship agreement. Many disclosures need to be added to the apprenticeship agreement. And two other aspects of the apprenticeship agreement, which will have direct bearing on employers, are a prohibition on non-compete provisions for the apprenticeship and a restriction on non-disclosure provisions that would that would require that would not allow workers to be able or apprentices to be able to work in the same field and in the same occupation with another employer. So you can still have a non-disclosure agreement, but it can't be so restrictive that it would prevent an apprentice from working with another employer in the same occupation. Also on apprenticeship protection, there's quite a bit on employer disclosure and monitoring. So I actually cut and pasted in total this first bullet. It requires sponsors to document a whole variety of past non-compliance with laws or rules of any participating employer. There's actually no limitation on time, so presumably that could go back to the beginning of time for any employer, and for a large employer that could be very voluminous, dealing with work locations that are not even participating in the apprenticeship program. So this is an area where some level of scoping at a minimum seems to be called for. And sponsors are expected to be actively monitoring participating employers after their admission for any violation around the many possible violations listed in that first bullet. So in some ways, sponsors are almost called in to be in this quasi enforcement role. And then I just want to acknowledge a few other aspects of the apprenticeship standards that have impact on employers. There are some new rules on wage progression, including rules that wages must be no less than the stipulated minimum wage for a region, and then must go through certain progressions, with the final progression no less than 75% of the journey workers' wage. There's rules on tracking and disclosing any costs to apprentices that are not going to be reimbursed. So to the extent that there are out-of-pocket costs for an apprentice, that needs to be disclosed up in front for the apprentice, and there needs to be some tracking of that and ultimately reporting on it. There are rules that relate to the standing of apprentices in the workplace, ensuring that they have the same, you can see it here, allowances, rights, and protections of non-apprentice employees. There's new disclosures that are required for any unpaid time spent in related instruction. So I know many apprentice programs use online training systems outside of work hours, or sometimes have folks go to college on their own time or go to classroom instruction on their own time. That needs to be disclosed. It's not prohibited, but just needs to be disclosed. And then there is a quite highly elaborated complaints process that as it is invoked, and to the extent it involves behavior of an employer or a worksite issue, would likely create some level of burden for employers to comply and participate in that complaints process. So that's really our top line review of these rules as they relate to employers. And so what I'd like to do is bring in my colleague, Ben. Ben, are you there?
Sure am.
All right, Ben, welcome. I want to introduce Ben. Ben's been working with Apprenticeships for America, is from Whiteboard Advisors, is going to help facilitate this section. And I'm already seeing some comments in the chat, so appreciate that. Would like to be able to entertain any questions about these rules. I'm happy to walk through, give you a view of the slides as we go here. So let me just do that here. So we can sort of walk through them one by one. Any questions about about the rules, and maybe we start with this quality assurance theme. Any questions?
I'll also say folks are welcome to type in the chat, or as John mentioned, use the hand raise function.
If not, I'll move to the next slide. Any questions on the record keeping function? Okay. Moving on to this quality assurance around training. Questions there?
There's one in the chat, John, from Deborah Messina, asking if the new rules apply to all registered apprenticeships, all states, what the coverage is.
Yeah, so all registered apprenticeships, all states, absolutely. I will say the CTE apprenticeship framework that's described in the rules, which we've discussed at our webinar on Tuesday, um, uh, almost all of these rules carry forward, slightly different rules, I think, around wage progression. And there's actually probably even higher levels of oversight and burden for some of the employer roles under CTE apprenticeship. So it would be this plus a few others.
Josh Laney's got a
Josh's,
question on the training
yeah,
part too.
I see
go ahead,
Josh's
John.
question about what constitutes appropriate, acceptable level of training for. I assume, Josh, this is for the journey worker.
Yeah, that's right. We were just talking about what would be the minimum standard for, who gets to decide? Is it the employer who says, yeah, my guy's satisfactorily trained in these required areas, or is there some other standard somewhere that we should be looking for?
So my read is that the employer is sort of required to opine that they have the right level of training for this. And presumably, if there was a complaint, then that might get tested in an official way. But it would be up to an individual registering office, whether that's federal or one of the SAAs, to come up with a way of testing that. But within the rules, there's no standard that's stipulated or even expectations that there would be submission of credentials or anything like that.
Well, that leads to kind of a related question. Because it's not within the rules spelled out, does that mean that the DOL then has the latitude at some point later to say, here are the minimum standards that we're requiring?
I suppose always, right? There's a lot of authority for the administrator in this program. I will say, I think one of the things that the department did was take a lot of the sub-regulatory rules and put them into rules. And you could have two views on that. One is it creates more transparency and accountability around the rules because they actually have to get now commented on. On the other hand, it now makes them rules, which means harder to work your way around or what have you. But my impression is that they tried to put more in the rules so that there would be less of the sub-regulatory guidance that people would have to lean on. That's just an impression.
A question from Matt too, John. Any idea how the mastery skills of the mentors have to be documented?
So I think a really great question. And there are, in the summary here, I didn't list out, there were a variety of criteria that were laid out in the rules. My own read is that it was pretty broad, that they had exposure to, developments in the field, that they had, some capacity to be able to, work with a diverse, be able to communicate with and train a diverse group of people. But my own take was that these were pretty broad objectives that the rules were trying to set out, not hard and fast. You had to have a certificate, in this training modality or what have you. They seem to sort of be shy of that. So yeah, I guess I'll just leave it there. I'm going to move us on to our next sort of thematic area, which is the diversity and inclusion area. Any comments about, or questions, I should say, questions about the diversity and inclusion provisions as they relate to employers? Yeah,
Josh
so
did drop. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, go ahead, man.
Oh, I'm happy to read it.
Yeah,
With the
please.
new requirement for the recruitment plan to be upfront in the standards, or are you basically putting the AA plan in the standards from the beginning?
That's kind of what it looks like. And in fact, there's a general approach here that far more apprenticeship design has to be worked out in the registration process. And having been a part of a couple of registration processes, you know, my sense is you could sort of have most things kind of figured out, but maybe, you know, the nuts and bolts of how you're going to work with an employer, or exactly what that's going to look like, could sort of wait till after the registration has been approved. It now seems like there's sort of upstreaming some of that work. And I think that creates some dilemmas for folks who are organizing apprenticeship, especially multi-employer apprenticeships, that there needs to be a lot more sort of working out fine-tuned details even before an apprenticeship has been approved. So I think there's some mechanical issues here that will be challenges for sponsors and probably deserve some level of commentary going back to the department. Nick, the good rubric that you speak to, can you just elaborate on that a little bit? Nick, Nicholas New, are you able to speak? Maybe not.
Yes, I can. Sorry,
Oh,
I
great.
had
Thanks,
you on
Nicholas.
my phone, so apologies. Urban Institute gave us very good guidance, but fundamentally, and we've applied it also in the state of Florida. Um, uh, uh, Obviously, with assessment criteria as defined in competency-based programs, then ultimately you have a rubric whereby a 3 out of 5 may be that you can repeat the task in a classroom environment once you've been demonstrated it or instructed on it. And a 5 out of 5 is full competency or mastery,
great.
where you can do it independently to the satisfaction of your journey worker. So, I think whilst there is journey worker satisfaction required, there's also the fact that can you produce evidence that shows you did this on your own? And it's been pretty black and white for us across various programs and technical programs.
That's excellent. So thank you for sharing that, number one. And I mean, it shows that there's actually, good practice. I will say, just in general, there's a tendency for us to get a little bit hot and bothered about these rules, particularly when you've waded through 700 pages of them a couple of times. But there's actually good research and background for most of these individual rules. Our challenge is that if you take them all together, you might create some challenges for just practical challenges around implementation.
Quick observation, John. I don't know whether you guys have seen this or anyone else feels like this, but a lot of these rules feel like the best ideas from SAAs and lots of people all brought together in one, and then they've gotten rid of anything that overlaps and kept the best version of it. Because a lot of these I've seen before, particularly in Florida, which ironically you wouldn't expect them to have more regulation, but they really do, and it's very good and it's very apprentice focused.
So first off, appreciate the shout out to Florida. They're also on my short list of high performing apprenticeship states. So glad to hear some reinforcement on that. And then I'll just say I think that's exactly. I think you've captured exactly sort of how these rules came about, and perhaps if we were going to be critical, that there was no filter applied, right, to all these great ideas that were out there. And so that's how we end up with a 700-page rule proposal.
Yeah, and the challenge is 90% of it's not invented here in my state. So it's
exactly.
a lot of new things. Good luck and Godspeed.
Thank you, Nick. All right, I'm going to move us on just so we can get to our conversation. Any questions or comments around some of the apprentice protection facets?
I do want to go back up to Miranda's question
Oh, yeah,
from
Miranda, sure.
earlier about whether the violation reporting applies to criminal acts, or if we understand how small a violation would have to be reported, noting that it could end up being a real rabbit hole.
I think you've exactly put your finger on it, and the lack of scoping, at least as I see it, in the regulations makes this almost prima facie an impossible rule to work with. I just think of somebody who's going to work with a multinational Fortune 500 company around apprenticeship and having to keep track of every single violation that they've ever had over the course of their 100-year history or what have you, just seems almost impossible to sort of think about. So this is an area where I think the department would really benefit from some feedback. If you're going to have this rule, how would you scope it in a way that's appropriate to the apprenticeship effort? Great. On to apprenticeship, the apprenticeship protection efforts. Any questions about some of the apprenticeship agreements changes, those non-disclosure and non-compete elements?
Josh's question about work commitments or clawback provisions and whether those count as non-compete.
And I think that's a great question. The regs are actually silent on it. It's one of the few things that they are silent on. So there's nothing in there at this stage, and either we can let that sleeping dog lie, or we can ask some questions about it. But that nothing in there at this stage. All right, I'm going to move us on. We're just to the tail end of our Q&A portion of this call. Any questions on the monitoring piece? Yes, Chanel, just letting you know, we will have a summary and a recording of this webinar available probably next week. All right, and then finally, just a few other areas of, sorry, working on NDA issues. So Deborah, do you want to just speak to that?
Well, sure. It's very new here. We're in California. We're in the San Francisco Bay Area, so we have a lot of high-tech industries, and we're doing our first 2 youth apprenticeships in cybersecurity and robotics. And so we're trying to kind of navigate our business partners wanting to have NDAs signed because they're dealing with sensitive information, like the cybersecurity company, for example. And yet these are minors. So right. It's, can it be them and their parent or guardian? And even with that, what are the limitations on what could be in that NDA?
Yeah, so the rules were quite clear that NDAs were allowed, but that they just couldn't be structured in a way that wouldn't allow the apprentice to take another job with another employer in that occupation or in that field.
I think one of the issues, though, is sometimes, at least here in the high-tech industries, you could be, legally at risk if you share any information. And so can a company decide to sue a minor and their family? So we have a legal team looking into that, but it's kind of complex. But it's
your layering of the minor on top of the NDA. That's a unique situation. That's great. That's great.
Yeah,
fabulous. Glad you're doing it. And of course, in the Bay Area, you practically can't sign into an office without signing an NDA. So it's kind of, they're ubiquitous. Yeah, exactly. Anything else on the apprenticeship protections area? Any questions on some of those aspects? Otherwise, I think we'll open it up for a conversation. And Ben, I'm going to bring you forward to facilitate that section.
Great. I mean, I think, again, excited for anything folks might want to put in the chat or just raise their hands. I mean, I think as an initial question to get the conversation started, and John, you may have thoughts on this yourself, it feels like of all of the various sort of provisions here, I'm getting the sense from folks' reactions just on this call that this might be one of the slightly less burdensome elements of the rule compared with some of the other ones. And I guess I'd be interested to hear from those on the call if folks agree that that's the case. I saw some comments saying this is stuff that everyone should be doing anyway. So hopefully it's just codifying that. Or if there are people who are concerned or think that this is going to place undue burden on employers. So I'll start with that question. Is this the right level of burden?
Anyone want to jump in?
And if we take silence as as acknowledgement, then sounds like everyone's probably okay with it. Mary, I see a hand.
I was
raised.
just
You
about to
can't-
call on you, Mary. Mary,
Zoom
please
does
jump in
also
here.
have a hand raise function, but go ahead, Mary.
I just think, I think I was the one that wrote, these are things that, we want employers to do, right? I mean, these are all things that we say this would be a really good idea. And yes, you should have all this stuff. Just working with small employers. This is going to be the thing that'll just say, okay, I can't possibly do this. It's just, or it's really going to put a lot of burden, if you want to call it burden, or additional responsibilities, let's call it that, to the sponsor to continually come up with different ways, better ways, whatever you want to call it, to have all the online tools and whatever to be able to monitor, report, measure. I think it's, it's one thing when you have a group of, 25 apprentices or 50 apprentices versus having one apprentice. And I think that this is when we always have this conversation that, the majority of people work for small companies, just in general, the majority of people. And, and you also know that as much as we try to get big companies to take on apprentices, you talk to them till you're blue in the face and they take on 3.
Right.
So, but they at least have the capacity, they have the people, they have the systems, all that good stuff. We all know these arguments. So I just think we have to be prepared, where the OA needs to be prepared to sort of be able to say, we think these are really important and these are tools and all that good stuff. So I just think that the pushback from small companies, if they even know that this stuff is out here, which they don't, I think we all just need to remember where we think apprentices are and how we're trying to really get apprentices into small business.
Mary, thanks for those comments. And for those who don't know Mary's very experienced in this field, but also has done a stint at the Society for Human Resources Management. So knows a thing or two about that crowd and what are going to be some of the challenges that folks in an HR office are likely to raise. If a company even has an HR office, right? Great. Other thoughts, other, anything that you would want to see different in these rules or regulations, opportunities that maybe we're missing that we should be thinking about. Karitza, so while you're thinking about that, let me address Karitza's question about the sort of phase in of these rules. So there's a fairly lengthy section that describes sort of transitional approaches to the rules. Essentially, apprenticeships that have previously been approved continue to operate as they have operated, but need to update on their review. And every apprenticeship is supposed to be reviewed every registered apprenticeship is supposed to be reviewed every 5 years. So there'll be sort of a rolling phase in of these rules as they apply to new to existing apprenticeships. That's at least my read. And again, that's an area where there could be feedback to the department. Any other comments or questions?
John, I was just looking at my notes from the standards, and I don't see that it's, you get to continue as you are until you're reviewed. I see a section that says, programs previously recognized by SAA have to be in compliance within 2 years following the SAA coming into compliance with the final rule. So if the SAA has 2 years till December of 26, and then after that, the programs have 2 years to come
2
into
years.
compliance. So it's a 4-year
So
clock.
I thanks for that catch. I appreciate it, Josh. Thanks for that catch. Great. Stand corrected. Josh, if you want to take on the facilitation role here, you're welcome.
No, sir, I'm good. I appreciate it.
I think you got a full-time job. Let's keep you in that job. Okay. I'm not hearing a lot of other comments, Ben. Maybe this. Oh, we'll take one more, and then I think we'll wrap up and give you a little bit of your day back. So first off, I completely agree that the incentivization question is squarely on the table with these regs. So thank you, Edgar, for raising that in the chat. And of course, the department will say, well, there's things we can do for incentivization that usually involve an appropriation somewhere or some tax provision, and then there's rules, and those two things are different things. So I think one of the questions to put back to the department, or one of the comments to put back to the department, is, is there a danger, just as Mary said, that you start layering on one more thing and one more thing and one more thing, and then we get to a place where an employer just says, it's not worth it for me, especially when there's no compensation for some of this. And I will say some of these rules, I'll just say two things about the rules. So one is, many of the provisions around apprentice protection, again, nothing wrong with apprentice protection, but they're kind of borrowed from a tuition-based school environment, where a student is paying to go to school, and then you want to have some protections if they're paying to go to school. If someone's being paid to learn, does that change the dynamics on protection? It's just a question. But it does seem like they're not exactly parallel. And then the second, and Kritza, we'll get to you in just a second. And then the second thing I'll say is that, I can't remember what the second thing I was going to say, so I'll just leave it there. Kritza, let's take your comment, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about how apprenticeship sponsors and employers will be made aware of the new requirements, and whether there will be any technical assistance offered to help them, get into compliance.
Yeah, excellent question. There is an expectation that state apprenticeship offices and presumably the federal apprenticeship leads in states would have an obligation around providing technical assistance. Practically, there is no new funding for staff in those offices or in the Office of Apprenticeship, and so I think there's a question about how that would actually play itself out. That's all I can say, and certainly nothing in the rules that speaks to that specifically. So I think with that, I'm gonna close this off here and give you 15 minutes back to your day. I want to thank everyone for participating in today's webinar, and just give a little bit of a preview of coming attractions. So Apprenticeships for America will be leading or sharing with you some of our thoughts on these rules, probably by the end of the month, second week in February. And then we'd like to engage you as stakeholders to this process in a process of giving feedback and comments to the Department of Labor. So you can expect that we'll be sharing with you multiple avenues for being able to support the comments process going forward. Comments will be due roughly the 15th or so of March. So we know we have an end date to this process and a due date by which we have to get comments to the department. Thanks so much to everyone for participating. I look forward to seeing you on other calls or in other events at Apprenticeships for America. Thank you.